In GameMaker, your game is made out of different assets, which are GameMaker's building blocks for making your game. And there are a number of different assets, different building blocks that you can use. In fact, GameMaker has so many of them, and each one has so many different parts to it that it can all be a little overwhelming. So in this video, you'll learn about 7 core assets along with examples of when and how to use them. Learning about these assets will give you a good sense of how GameMaker works and how you can use it to build your own game, or at least know where to look for more information. The first 3 core assets I'm going to cover are rooms, objects, and sprites. Rooms are like places that you can put things, objects are those things, and sprites are how you make both rooms and objects visible to your player. Every GameMaker game must have at least one room, and you can use these rooms in a lot of different ways. You can use rooms like, rooms, where you set up everything in the room exactly the way you want it, and it will always look like that when you go to that room. GameMaker does this for most of their template projects. For example, Windy Woods uses a room for the menu, the levels, and even the game over screen. But you can also use rooms like a stage, where you will have some object act like a stage manager and switch things in and out depending upon what is going on. You might do this for a roguelike, where the level is procedurally generated. A third way that you can use rooms is as a staging area. A place you transfer quickly to in order to set things up and then out of that the player will never even see. I often use rooms like this at the very start of the game. For example, in my game Shooty Dodge, which is out on the Google Play Store, I use an initial room to create my game manager object and get the phone's resolution and then set all the scaling. Objects are the next essential asset. Objects are the primary way GameMaker lets you put things into your game, and they can be virtually anything you want them to be. You can add a sprite to them so that they are visible, but they can also function without sprites, invisible objects that can store and pass around data, monitor player interactions, play music, again, virtually anything you want. In Windy Woods, we have examples of both. The player, the enemies, and many more are objects that have sprites assigned to them. But Windy Woods also uses invisible objects to manage things, like Object Game Manager, which has code to detect the operating system and create touch controls if necessary. Objects work by using events, which contain code. These events allow you to control everything about the object. There are many different types of events, but here are several important ones. The first is the create event. This event happens when you create an instance of an object. Whatever code you put in here will only run once when the object is created. This event is used to set up the object by, for example, setting the initial values for its variables. The next event is the step event. Everything you put in here runs once every step or frame. That means if your game is running at 60 frames per second, the code in this event will run 60 times in 1 second. The last event I'm going to mention is the draw event. While GameMaker will draw any sprite you assign to an object by default, you often want to take over the draw event and control what happens yourself, as Windy Woods is doing here. One important thing to know about objects is that they are more like blueprints. You design them in GameMaker, but the object itself doesn't actually exist in your game. Instead, instances of those objects will exist in your game. This is what allows you to have many versions, many instances of the same object at the same time. So rooms are where you put things, and objects are those things, but if you want the player to be able to see anything, you need some art. And sprites are your art, your visuals, how you show things to the player. GameMaker has a built-in image editor, which is actually great for simple pixel art, but you can, of course, import art from other sources into GameMaker. But sprites are not only single images. Sprites are also often animations. When a sprite has multiple frames, you can set the speed of the animation, and when you assign this sprite to an object, or place it directly in the room, GameMaker will then animate it for you. The last basic thing to know about sprites is that GameMaker attaches a mask to them. And this mask is the main way that GameMaker detects things like collisions or interactions with touches or the mouse. Audio assets are exactly what they sound like. All your game's audio, music, or sound effects. GameMaker doesn't let you edit audio inside of it, so you will want to import finished audio, but it does let you control the audio in a variety of different ways, such as controlling the volume or the pitch, hooking it up to emitters for 3D sound, and more. Windy Woods has a number of audio files in it, which it uses for music and sound, and you can preview these audio files by selecting the asset and then playing it in either the inspector or the workspace. Fonts much like audio, are also exactly what you would expect them to be, and for the most part work exactly the way you would expect them to in Word or Google Docs. Wendy Woods, for example, uses fonts to display the text on these buttons and the amount of coins a player has. Just like audio, you can't edit a font itself in GameMaker, but there are many ways to control how text is drawn to the screen. Sequences are one of the most powerful assets in GameMaker, and as a result, they are also one of the more complicated ones. They are a collection of other assets such as objects, sprites, sounds, and even other sequences that do something over time. They also provide you with a very visual way of positioning and even animating portions of your game. For example, Wendy Woods uses sequences to set up its HUD and optional touch controls and animate its pause menu, main menu, and game over screen, and you can use them for other things as well, such as whole cutscenes. Last, but definitely not least, we have script assets. Scripts are the other primary place you will write code, and for the most part, they are used to hold all of your custom functions. A script can hold one or many functions, and functions written in a script are generalized functions that work pretty much the same way the built-in GameMaker functions work. They can be very simple. Wendy Woods only uses one, but they can also be as complex as you need them to be. In Shooty Dodge, I use a lot of them, and they're a great way to create general, reusable functionality that you can use in multiple projects. For example, Juju Adams' massive input or scribble libraries, or just simple things like this function map value that maps a number from one range to another, which I use in almost all of my projects. Now that you've learned about the 7 core assets in GameMaker, I would practice this knowledge by either following a short tutorial such as how to make a classic arcade game in GameMaker, or by downloading the Wendy Woods project from the GameMaker start screen and looking at examples of these different assets in a real project. And of course, there's always the manual if you want to read more about them.